All right, guys, I just want to welcome back to the Everything Else World podcast. Today, me and Nick here, we do a preview and prediction for the Sugar Bowl between Alabama and Kansas State. 6.5-point line in favor of the Tide. 56 is the over-under. This one will be played 12 p.m. Eastern Time, New Year's Eve, from Caesars Superdome in New Orleans, Louisiana. First meeting ever between these two schools. Looking at this Kansas State offense, Nick, Adrian Martinez is close to a return, but I don't think they're in any rush to get him back as Will Howard. He's the much more talented passer. And despite not having the greatest completion rates the last two games, 56 and 52%, he's protected the football, 15 touchdowns, 2 picks this year, and he's been able to generate some big plays through the air and just all around just be a conservative playmaker. Good size for Will Howard, 6'5", 235. Again, much more impressive arm talent, 1,423 yards on the year in 6 games for him. And I think Martinez, he'll get involved in this game because his legs are certainly an asset to this offense, 615 yards, 10 touchdowns, 5.5 plus per carry. Deuce Vaughn, he's going to be playing in this game, 1,425 yards, 18 touchdowns as a runner. He's also an impactful pass catcher of 42 grabs for 378 in a trio of scores. He had a big run against TCU that really sparked this offense in what was a defensive affair that ended up in overtime. DJ Giddens has been a respectable number 2, 451 and 6 touchdowns for him. Malik Knowles, he's a little bit beat up, 47 grabs, 719 yards. Then Phillip Brooks, 41 recs for 543 yards of his own. And then Cade Warner really stepped up this year, impressed by what he was able to do. He also has 41 receptions for 400-plus yards. Nick, this is an offense we said coming into the year, they needed to stay healthy to get to a point like this. They were able to stay healthy in the key areas. At running back, Vaughn, he's played 13 games. Knowles and Brooks, Warner, they've all played 13 games. Adrian Martinez has been a little bit beat up, but Will Howard's a veteran who's been in this situation before. So this offense this year, everything was perfect for them. It leads to a Big 12 title win, 33 points per game for them. Looking at a pretty high average of 420 yards per contest as well. What are your thoughts on this offense that I was very impressed by this season?
This was an offense that was very shallow in terms of depth, and we highlighted that if they had been banged up early on in the season, they'd find themselves in some serious trouble, but they stayed healthy, and they were able to put a lot of points up on the board. 38.2 points per game, 420 total yards of offense per game, a great balance, 210 rushing, 210 passing, 209 rushing, fantastic balance right in the middle. A lot of talent here. Deuce Vaughn, fantastic back. I love what he can do. One of my favorite players watching college football, 1,400 yards on the ground, 8 scores for him, 5.3 yards per carry, 271 attempts, a ton of carries for him. Will Howard, Adrian Martinez, both of them have their own strengths. Pretty balanced season overall for the two of them. Of course, Martinez's balance and health issue. Howard, the better arm strength, the better pocket passer, 15 touchdowns, 2 interceptions for him, 61.6% completion percentage. Certainly not exactly where you want it to be, a little bit lower than you expect, but solid numbers for him. Martinez, fantastic dual threat, 615 on the ground, the 10 scores on the ground for him. I love Malik Knowles. He does a whole lot for this team. He has 3 rushing touchdowns, 162 yards on the ground as well, in addition to his pass catching abilities, 719 yards receiving, 2 scores for him, 48 grabs for him. Brooks, Warner, these guys are solid. They've stepped up. Vaughn as well. He's got 42 grabs on the season. DJ Giddens gets involved occasionally as well. He has 6 scores on the ground. This offense has so much balance. They can kind of really do what they want in different situations. They can throw the ball. They can run the ball. You saw it against TCU. Vaughn broke out a few big runs here and there, but they also were able to balance against TCU and attack through the air. This offense is really good top to bottom. There's a reason why they won the Big 12.
We're also led by a phenomenal guard in Cooper Beebe, one of the best pass blockers in college football this year. Kansas State offensive line, they've allowed 19 sacks this year. Right behind them, Alabama with 20. Very similar offenses in terms of numbers. That leads to an Alabama offense, Nick. Bryce Young playing in this game. Not really shocked. Something about him just made me think the entire time that he was going to play in this game. Will he come back for next year? Probably not. 3,000 yards, 27 touchdowns, 5 picks in 11 games this year. Bryce Young, a lot of people would consider it a down year, considering he won the Heisman last year and he was so terrific. Obviously his numbers are nowhere near they were last year. But this was just a strange year for this Alabama offense, especially for Bryce Young. He really had to lead this unit numerous times. He had to showcase his magic. People wanted to talk about how magical Caleb Williams is, but I think Bryce Young is right behind him in the stuff he's had to do this year, especially in that LSU game, which pretty much knocked him out of playoff contention. A handful of guys that are not going to be playing in this game for Alabama, though, Nick, especially at wide receiver. Christian Leary, JoJo Earl, Trayshawn Holden, Aaron Anderson. These guys are all in the portal. Some of those guys haven't been really involved much this year regardless. Depth takes a big hit. Javion Cohen, one of their starting guards, has also gone to Miami. Damian George, I think he's also been, respectable contributor on the offensive line as well. this is an offense. Trey Sanders is also gone, hasn't really been involved much, but Jahmyr Gibbs is going to play as well, it appears. I haven't seen anything that indicates he's opting out. 850 yards, 7 touchdowns rushing for him. He's also been a big-time pass catcher of 378 and 3 touchdowns. He's been a guy that's really bailed out this football team. He has 42 receptions. That leads this team. Right behind him, Ja'Cory Brooks, Jermaine Burton. They both have 37 each, 590-plus yards for the pair. They also have combined 13 touchdowns. After that, though, I think Cam Latu is probably going to have to get involved a little bit more. So will Kobe Pertese, Isaiah Bond. I think there's a lot of young talent in this receiving core overall. Just a very inconsistent year for Alabama, Nick, and that's why they've struggled so much this year to put away opponents. I mean, they've played in a number of close games this year, especially in conference play. Ole Miss, LSU, Tennessee, Texas A&M, Arkansas was close for almost 4 quarters. In Texas, it came down to a game-winning field goal. This offense, the exact same as it was last year. Big problem for this team is penalties on the road. I think the Alabama fans will probably outgain Kansas State in this one, but certainly, again, they're going on the road. How do you expect this offense to fare, and how do you feel about the inconsistency remarks?
Without Bryce Young and Jahmyr Gibbs, his team would have 6 wins this year. Especially Bryce Young, he bailed them out of so many situations. You saw it in the Texas game, you saw it in the LSU game. Especially the Texas game. I mean, some of those throws he made towards late in the game, some of those decisions were fantastic in a hostile environment. It was in Texas. I was at both those games. DKR was ridiculously loud. I couldn't even hear myself think. A lot of penalties so far this season. Nick Saban said during a recent press conference he has no opt-outs for this game, which is really something I love as an Alabama fan. I want to see these guys play. This should mean something, a bowl game. This is important. It doesn't matter that we missed the playoffs. This is important. You got to win your bowl game. I think this is very important for the team. I always kind of had a feeling Bryce Young was going to stay in this game. He's a hell of a fighter, hell of a competitor. And I think he wants to go out on one last strong performance. 3,000 yards through the air this season, 27 touchdowns, 5 interceptions. Certainly numbers down compared to his Heisman winning season last year, but I think that was expected considering the talent he lost, obviously losing John Mechie and Jamison Williams and replacing with a lot of young talent and guys from the portal that did not quite live up to expectations. Jahmyr Gibbs absolutely smashed my expectations. Can't wait to see what he can do in the NFL. Fantastic running back, 850 yards on the ground, 7 scores for him. Chase McClellan quietly having a good season, number 2 back, 613 yards on the ground, 6 scores for him. I love what McClellan can do. I think he's got a really nice skill set, a lot of talent there. In terms of wide receivers, you wanted a little bit more of Jermaine Burton. He kind of really started to show up in the last 2-3 games this season. The Auburn game, he definitely put on a bit of a show there. I liked his numbers in that game. 590 in the season for him, 6 touchdowns. Ja'Cory Brooks stepped up big time. 623 receiving yards for him, 7 scores. There are a lot of guys that have been lost to the portal. Holden gone, JoJo Earl gone. These are guys that are losing. Certainly disappointing to see these guys throw their names in the portal. But I think there is some talent here with Isaiah Bond, Kobe Prentice. Have not seen anything from Tyler Harrell. Don't really know what his status continues to be. This offense is not where they thought they'd be. The offensive line, looked poor at times. Some pieces did not live up to expectations. I think Steen ended up actually being a solid piece coming over from Vandy towards the end of the season. But at the beginning of the season, I was very concerned, especially against Texas. He had some bad missed tackles, bad missed reads, and some penalties there, and against Utah State in the opener. Overall, this offense did not live up to expectations that we had. I think they were too lofty in the preseason. But not a bad season in total. 40 yards, 40 points per game, 475 total yards of offense per game. Not a bad season at all. And I think next year, it's more experience, hit the portal, get some more talented players, and get some playmakers. This Alabama offense will be right back to where they belong.
125th this year in penalties. Tyler Booker, J.C. Latham, though, they've been terrific. Looking at the defense we'll be facing, 20 points per game allowed is the Kansas State Wildcats. This is a team that fared very well against TCU in the second go-around. They gave up 469 yards in that game, most of which really came in that second half. I think for the most part, TCU had been on skates because of Kansas State's defense. All in all this year, I think this has been a very sound unit. You have numerous amount of playmakers. Austin Moore has really stepped up at linebacker. Felix Uzama, he's a phenomenal defensive end. This guy, you talk about quick get-off. We'll talk about that here in a minute with Willie Anderson. Uzama is right there with him, though. 11 tackles for loss, 8.5 sacks, handful of forced fumbles. He just has great burst and acceleration. Brendan Mott, 7 tackles for loss for him at defensive end. Eli Huggins has been a great nose guard during his career. He's been able to stay healthy this year. 6'5", 297. Khaled Duke, another one of those guys I think has really stepped up this year for the Kansas State defensive line. You look at the secondary, though. This is a team that 57.8% opponent completion rating. They've had 16 interceptions on the year compared to 16 touchdowns. Julius Brents has been great over the back half of the year. He's got 4 picks. Kobe Savage has 3 of his own. And then you also look at the best corner they have in Dow. This guy is going to Dow, that is. He's going to be healthy for this game. He's expected to play, which is great. That's another ball hawk they have. Much like Deuce Vaughn, though, he has no size, and he's very underrated, 6 foot 171, but he's a ball player, and that's what Kansas State has on this team, top to bottom. Again, though, I think Austin Moore has just been terrific, leads the team in tackles with 10, with 85. He also has 10 tackles for loss. This is a defense, Nick, I think has been very good this year. You look what they've done against the run as well. Not as superb, 148 yards per game allowed, giving up 4.2 yards per touch. TCU, really, Max Duggan really added that total late in that game. I think for the most part, they bottled up TCU very well. They were not good against Texas, though, a number of weeks ago. They've allowed 100-plus, in 5 straight games now. What are your expectations for this run defense against Jahmyr Gibbs, a guy who's very versatile and he can do just as much as Vaughn can. He can hurt you in one play. Ask Arkansas. How do you think this is going to go?
I think this defense has a good chance against Jahmyr Gibbs here. I like this Kansas State defense. They've definitely gotten better throughout the season. Some of the numbers against the run have improved, but I think Jahmyr Gibbs can have a great day. I think he has potential here to break out a few good runs against his defense. I like this linebacking core at times. Austin Moore, talented guy, leading the team in tackles, 85 total tackles. Daniel Green, 56 total tackles in the season for him. Felix Azuma, fantastic in the defensive line. One of my favorite players to watch in terms of defensive linemen in college football right now. 8.5 sacks, 44 total tackles. Brandon Mott as well, 31 tackles, 6 sacks for him. I think this defense has gotten better throughout the season. They certainly have impressed me in some situations, holding TCU to 28 points, Kansas 27, Baylor to 3 points. These are some impressive numbers. I like the total numbers on the season. I think this is a good defense that has some good players here. No opt-outs really on this defense. So all these guys are playing. These guys are hyped up for this game. They won the Big 12. The secondary is solid as well. Hayes, Chatham, Savage. These guys are all fantastic in secondary. A lot of pass breakups here. Savage, 3 interceptions as well. So I think this is an interesting matchup. I'd like to see what this defense can do against the Alabama offense.
Yeah, the thing about Kansas State, they rank second nationally in turnover margin with a margin of 14. That's going to be a big thing going into this game. Alabama's 95th, so that's certainly an edge they have here. Look at the Alabama defense, 311 yards per game, 18 points per game allowed. I think on the stat sheet they look really good, Nick, but just something this year seemed off about this unit. 125 yards allowed on the ground. They gave up 318 against Auburn. That was just a whopping number. They're giving up 185 plus in 3 of the last 4 games, with the lone outlier being against an FCS school. This is just a strange defense this year, because I've been saying it 2 years in a row now, where I think the defense is going to get back to Nick Saban physicality, where they just dominate in the trenches. That's not the case. The top 5 leaders in tackles for loss come from the linebacking core or from the secondary. Willie Anderson, of course, 17 of those. Absurd numbers, 10 tackles for loss, or 10 sacks rather, with 12 QB hurries. He's been great. He's going to play in this game, which is awesome. Brian Branch, he's been phenomenal from the slot, and he's also been even better this year coming off the edge, much like he was last year. 7 pass breakups, 10 TFL, 78 tackles. He projects very well at the next level. Jalen Moody, Dallas Turner, very happy that Moody stuck around this year. Henry Kyoto as well. Probably a little bit probably a little bit worse than he was a season ago. 89 tackles for him. DeMarco Helms, he has been, he had some struggles mainly in that Tennessee game, and I think for the most part he's had a pretty strong season. This is a unit loaded with talent. We talk about guys like Brian Branch, Kool-Aid McKinstry, another one who's been very sound in coverage. Jordan Battle, top to bottom, has been a very good player. And I think Byron Young's probably been the best pure defensive lineman. But this team, again, Nick, lacks presence on the interior D-line. I think, Byron Young, DJ Dale, these guys are seniors. Thought they would come back and dominate. But it's been a while since we've had dominance in the trenches from Alabama. We're looking at maybe 2017-18. I think 2019 with Quentin Williams is probably the last time they really dominated in the trenches. I mean, for the most part, they performed very well against the run, but the last 3 games, 3 of the last 4, that is very concerning, especially going against this versatile running attack. I think we're going to see a lot of Adrian Martinez. Can Alabama contain it, though? I
agree. The battle in the trenches have been lost for Alabama the last few seasons. Nick Saban's defenses have not lived up to the expectations they used to have. I think the penalties are also certainly not helping this defense. A lot of mistakes, bad pass interference calls, bad calls, bad offsides calls, defensive line. DJ Dale, I expected a whole lot more out of him. Only 2.5 sacks, 16 total tackles for him. Byron Young, great player, great leader, 45 total tackles in the year, 3.5 sacks. But again, you expect a little bit more out of him. Henry To'oTo'o, a down year for him. Didn't break 100 tackles like many people expected him to do. He's the leader on that defense. You expected him to be more vocal this year. You didn't really see that at times. 89 total tackles, 2.5 sacks. DeMarco Helms, a guy I'm not the biggest fan of, but I can't knock the 95 total tackles. Yes, he's looked lost in coverage on a few occasions, but I certainly can't knock the tackle production. Very impressed with that. Brian Branch, Jordan Battle, two guys, coming from the secondary. Solid numbers for them. Will Anderson, of course, playing in this game, which I think is fantastic. I love watching him play. Were the expectations a little too high for him coming to this season? Yeah, considering what he did last season, but the numbers are not bad. Isolated, they're fantastic. 10 sacks, 51 total tackles for him. He has an interception that he returned for a touchdown as well. Ridiculous for him. He's going to be a freak in the NFL. Can't wait to see where he goes. Definitely a top 5 draft pick on my board. Look at a guy like Dallas Turner. I paged him for a big breakout again this year. I was high on him as a true freshman last year. Equally as high on him this year. I thought he really kind of stepped in to this mold. I think he's continuously getting better and better. 4 sacks, 37 total tackles. Next year could be the year he totally breaks out. I like what he can do. Kool-Aid McKinstry played a big role in the special teams. Not a bad role in the secondary either. 34 total tackles plus the pick for him and a sack as well. Jaheim Otis on the defensive line. He's had a decent season, 27 total tackles. Terrion Arnold in the secondary. Arnold looked lost at times. He's a young guy, so I certainly can understand that. But Arnold has got better as season gone on. He's definitely impressed me in certain situations. 8 pass breakups for him. One of the highest numbers on the teams. Kool-Aid has 12, so that leads the total there. This defense, it's not a Nick Saban defense, but it's not a bad defense by any stretch of the imagination. The numbers are solid on paper. 125 rushing yards per game allowed, 186 yards through the air. You want to see those numbers reduced potentially as an Alabama fan, but I think this defense has a lot of room to grow. Yes, there's a lot of talent they have to replace in the front 7 next year, especially in the defensive line, but I think there is some room to grow with this defense.
Some numbers that are not as good, though. Only 5 interceptions on the year. I guess that's just one number, really. That's a terrible mark, especially for this defense. 29% on third down, 9th in FBS. That's a really good mark. And including McKinstry, 12 pass breakups for him. Eli Ricks has been good this year when he's been on the field. We'll see what happens in this game. I think Kansas State's going to look to run the ball 40 to 50 times, though. And then they're going to look for those shots with Brooks and Knowles downfield. What are the final thoughts and the prediction on this one, Nick? It's going to be an interesting game. I don't think Alabama's going to lose. You're a fan, of course. You won't be making a pick. I'm going to go 34-28, though. I think Kansas State will certainly hang in there. It's a really good football team, and I do think they're going to have some good success on the ground. I think their defense will stiffen up in the red zone at times as well. I don't think this receiving core is really going to phase them too well, especially with those guys in the back end playing with confidence. I think the biggest key to the game, though, I already talked about with Kansas State, is just going to be run the ball, control the clock, and then get pressure on Bryce Young on third down. And you make sure you take good angles, too, because something he does is he's just so calm and cool in the pocket, one of the best I've ever seen at the college level. He's just very, very calm in the pocket. It's very impressive to watch. I think for Alabama, you're going to have to win up front, mainly on the defensive line. You want to slow down their running game. You beat game breakers on the interior. If you can do that, it's really going to mess up Kansas State's philosophy. And don't give up big plays, whether that be to Deuce Vaughn or those guys downfield or even in special teams. I want to take Bama to win this game. I know, Nick, you'll be in attendance. I'm expecting a good one, and I know you're probably expecting a good one too. How do you see this game playing out?
I'm very excited for this game. I will be flying down to New Orleans. This one, I can't wait to get in the Superdome. I think this will be a great game, a good crowd. I think both teams will travel very well. I think Kansas State fans have a lot to be excited about for this game. This team has overperformed some expectations, winning the Big 12, playing in the Sugar Bowl. Certainly excited for them. And I think Alabama, some fans are disappointed they did not make the playoff. There was a chance that Alabama backdoor their way into the playoff. It didn't work out quite that way. And I'm more than happy for TCU to get their chance. I have no problems with that. Alabama should not have lost the 2 games they did this season to Tennessee and LSU. But I think having everybody playing in this game, no opt-outs, is fantastic news. I love seeing that as a fan. I want to see all these guys play one more time, especially Bryce Young, who I project will be the number 1 overall pick in the draft this upcoming spring. I think this is a balanced matchup. I think both teams will have a good day on the ground. I think the battle does come down to who has more yards on the ground, which defense can contain the star running backs between Deuce Vaughn and Jahmyr Gibbs. And I think Alabama's Jahmyr Gibbs will just have that slightly better day, and I think Alabama will win this game. Not going to make a pick, no score prediction for me, but I do like this game. I think it's a lot of fun, very underrated matchup in the New Year's 6.
Certainly hard to envision Bryce Young losing his last game in a Tide uniform. Of course, we're assuming, but I do think he's gone to the next level. As always, Nick, I appreciate you joining me.
Yeah, absolutely. Looking forward to this one. Very excited to see how this game plays out.
That's me for this episode, guys. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. See you next time.